Yeti there. Hopefully now we should be coming through. It should be better. So we'll go ahead and we'll start things over here in a second once we get this going. That goes there. That goes there. And I think the audio settings should now be fixed. Go ahead and let me know if you're still having issues hearing me, but I'm thinking we're switched over to the right device now. We should be coming through hopefully. Cool. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dad. Appreciate your comments there. Let's back it up. Let's take it back a step. And so we'll talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown here in a second. But welcome everybody. Good Monday afternoon. I'm Kevin Marhine, the host here of the Lions Grid, and this week we'll be talking about the Week 2 victory the Lions had over the Washington Commanders. 36-27, the final score there, with the Lions now improving to 1-1 on the season, and now 1-1 against NFC East teams. So as we were showing here, we'll put back up our little Amon-Ra St. Brown note, but really joining an elite club. He had 9 catches, 116 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns in this game. This improves him to 8 consecutive games with at least 8 catches and a touchdown. And he joins a club that includes the New Orleans Saints' Michael Thomas and currently free agent Antonio Brown, as the only 3 wide receivers in NFL history to have 8 consecutive games with 8 catches in them. So he has been a real go-to for the Lions so far this year, and I think ever since Week 15 of last year, has been a big part of that offense. Jared Goff certainly leaning on him quite a bit. So look to see that continue, because I think one thing that we did learn from this game against the Washington Commanders is that this Lions offense does seem to be for real. Back-to-back weeks now, they've scored more than 35 points. It's the first time since 1970 that the Detroit Lions have scored more than 35 points in their opening 2 games of the season. I think what's actually probably more important than the fact that they've scored that many points is the fact that this week, their offensive line, which was supposed to be coming into the season, really their real big advantage is the fact that they played without Frank Ragnow and they were playing without one of their starting guards. So you had a lot of guys filling in, doing the next man up thing for the Lions, and they still were able to keep that offensive production where it was at, which I think is says a lot about the offense. I think if you're looking at both sides of the ball right now, I think the defense. We'll talk about them here in a second. They definitely stepped up from last week, but I think the offense with these first 2 weeks has been the more consistent of the units. I think one of the things that will be interesting to keep an eye on here is Swift has been fantastic out of the backfield. He was a little bit limited here. DeAndre was in week 2. He was having an ankle injury and is dealing with an ankle injury. His ankle was sore in the game, and it seemed like they did give a few more touches to Jamal Williams. Of course, Jamal Williams continues, if you're a fantasy football owner, to eat up some of those DeAndre Swift fantasy football touchdowns in the red zone. So if you're a fantasy, if you're only interested in DeAndre Swift is from a fantasy perspective, you're probably a little bit frustrated because Jamal Williams is vulturing a few of those touchdowns. But he's looking really good. He's had some really explosive plays despite that ankle injury, and certainly seems like he's going to be, if he can stay healthy, if it can just be a minor thing where he can still play each week and contribute, certainly looking like he can be one of the most elite running backs in the NFL and really join that club. Like a lot of people did. A lot of people thought coming into the season he could be a top 5 fantasy running back. And if he continues at the pace he is, certainly can. But there's a little bit of worry there. We know he has been banged up at different times throughout his young career, and of course he is dealing with that ankle injury. But it seemed like it might have cut into his the number of touches he got last week, but it didn't cut down on his production. He was still pretty productive. He didn't have the 144 yards on the ground like he did in week 1, but he was able to contribute in both the passing and the running game. So I think there's quite a bit to like about this Lions offense. They're scoring points. They're doing it even with injuries. You have, as we talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is being just for a second-year wide receiver is being a great weapon. Jared Goff threw 4 touchdown passes and no interceptions. Kind of hard to hate on him for that. 256 yards through the air. So really, really good performance there. Was sacked 3 times, but again, with a offensive line that was down 3 starters, overall, really, really happy with what we saw out of the Lions offense. And I think that's going to be their strength as we move into the season. Now let's talk about that defensive side of the football. Hutchinson announced himself this game in this game, getting 3 sacks, 3 QB hits, 2 tackles for a loss, and 6 tackles overall. I think he was really good, especially in the first half. He did slow down a little bit in the second half, and we're going to talk if I have to. Uh, Overall, I think this was a really strong game from the Lions. I think really they were in the position dealing with Washington from the very beginning, where they really owned this game from the first quarter to the end. But they did, they let up a little bit in the second half, and one of the things is Aiden Hutchinson had a great game. He had those 3 sacks. He's the only Lions rookie defensive lineman to record 3 sacks in a single game. And they've had some great players. Robert Porcher is probably the one that jumps to mind for me, and even he hadn't done that. So, he's did very well in the first half of the game, but I like to see him, do that more consistently throughout the game. Of course, like I said, he did have a bit of an injury which slowed him down in the second half, but still good. So really great to see that. I think there's still, a lot of people have projected that Hutchinson might be that off or defensive rookie of the year, and we've seen what he's doing there this past week, looking good and having the defense. Um, I think last week when they were playing the Eagles, Jalen Hurts is a bit of a mobile quarterback, and even though they were getting pressure on him, it was difficult for them to actually, take that pressure and turn it into sacks and things like that. Whereas this week with Carson Wentz, not as mobile as Hurts, so they were able to take that pressure and actually turn those into sacks, which is something that hopefully they'll continue to do. um, I think they're going to need to, especially next week, because one of the things that I talked about here, and we'll move on to the next point, is the need for consistency. Um, I want to see that complete game out of the Lions defense. They gave up 0 points in the first half, and then they gave up 15 points to start the second half. So the Commanders were able to come in after halftime, make some changes, and then were able to execute. And really, the Lions did not respond the same way they started the game. Like I said, 0 points in the first half, and then 15 unanswered out of the Washington Commanders there. So as we move forward, something that I'm going to want to see out of the Lions and see them continue to take steps. And obviously, the difference between a team that's headed to the playoffs and a team that's showing improvement, because, the Lions were towards the, bottom part of the league last year. So we're really just looking for improvement, not necessarily expecting them to make the playoffs, but at least showing signs that they're headed in the right direction. I would like to see them by the end of the game, end of the season, really have that complete game where they do come out from the first whistle of the game to the last whistle, and show the same consistent level of play. Because right now there is some fluctuation, and credit to the Commanders that they were able to make those changes at halftime and come out and score some points and make this game interesting against the Lions. Offensively, you saw the Lions do and everything they needed to do to continue to win the game. So they never lost the lead in the second half, which is fantastic. But the defense, there was certainly a drop off, a change between the first half defense and that second half. And again, part of that may have been the Aiden Hutchinson injury that sort of slowed him down and prevented him from keeping that same sort of pressure on Wentz that he did in the first half. But as they look to take on teams here moving forward, whether it be the Vikings, the Packers, you're going to need to have a more consistent game, because if you give Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, any sort of room to come back in those games, you're going to have a bad time, because they've been doing this for a while, and they will take advantage of that and can certainly make you pay. You look at the Packers getting the win last night against the Bears. The Vikings will be playing the Eagles, so that'll be good to see how they match up against a team that the Lions have already played. And then, of course, we'll be traveling to Minnesota, and one of the furthest games the Lions have to travel this year, because they have a very favorable schedule to play the Vikings. The big thing for me that I'm going to be worried about is, again, we saw it in week one with A.J. Brown. He sort of lit the Lions up with Jalen Hurts. He had a tremendous game. Good way to announce himself there in Philadelphia, or as a Philadelphia Eagle, the start of his career. Justin Jefferson, what he did in week one was fantastic. So we'll have to see if he's definitely looks like he might be the number one fantasy receiver this year, just the number one receiver overall in terms of stats. So going to be scary when the Lions have to go play them, but hopefully if they can turn in that consistent effort, if the defense can consistently get to the quarterback throughout the game, uh, hopefully you'll see the Lions continue to post W's. And last closing thoughts here, and Joe, I did see your point there about people on 97 the one not liking Jared Goff. I think there's, that's going to be what it is. I think he's certainly not going to be that flashy quarterback. I think that comes out and really is the reason that you win games. I think it's going to be a lot of the skill players and things like that that sort of make the highlights. And he's going to be not necessarily a game manager, but I think that's really they kind of want him not to lose the game for him. So they want him to get the ball to the people, these talented players that are putting him around him, and just keep be safe with the ball. So I think that's not necessarily the sexiest thing when it comes to a quarterback. When you think about Aaron Rodgers, certainly he can will his team on to victories. I'm sure Detroit fans would also love to have a QB that can do that, that can take over a game and sort of will their team on to victory. But I don't think that's Jared Goff. I think he is I think he isn't necessarily a quote unquote game manager, but I think when he plays in that style and plays within his own skill set, I think that's where he's at his best. So for me, I have no complaints about Jared Goff through the first 2 weeks. Again, I think he is showing that he is a capable quarterback, and as long as the rest of the team executes at the level they've been, there's no reason why this Lions team can't continue to win games. And speaking of winning games, they avoid that dreaded 0-2 start to the season. Teams that start 0-2, I'd seen it during the I think it was the broadcast of the Sunday night game, or as they were leading up to the Sunday night game. The teams that start 0-2 since 2018 have they're like 0-18 at making the playoffs. So a lot of teams don't make the playoffs, and in particular for the Lions, when they start 0-2, they tend to have a bad time. They go 0-2 of those. They've gone 0-2 15 times to start a season and have one winning record and 14 losing records in those 15 seasons that they started 0-2. So they avoid that 0-2 start. Again, I don't think necessarily that the Lions are a lock for the playoffs. I think they are certainly a road where they can get there, and a lot is going to come down to how they play their NFC North opponents. If you can win 2 games against the Chicago Bears, if you can split against the Vikings and split against the Packers, I think that's maybe the best case scenario. And it would certainly help them get towards a potential playoff berth. But really, we're just looking for improvement, right? We're not looking for them to explode on the scene just yet. Avoiding that 0-2 start, I think, at least sets them up for the potential for having a winning record, because as mentioned, the last 15 times they've started 0-2, only one time have they been able to complete the season with a winning record. So hopefully they can use it as a building block to see continued success throughout the remainder of the season, and really turn in really help build momentum for year 3. Because when Dan Campbell took over, he said it was going to be a 3-year process. He made that very clear. So this is year 2. I'm not expecting playoffs this year. Next year, if everything goes according to their plan, should be the playoff year. So this should be a season that sort of indicates that they are headed in that direction. Avoiding that 0-2 start, I think, does a lot to help put them in position to make that a reality. So we'll have to see as they continue to close out the season, if they're capable of doing that, which will be interesting. So again, thank you for everybody who's tuned in. Joe and Dad, thank you, of course, for your comments earlier on about the apologies for the technical difficulties. We had the wrong input device there selected, so appreciate you guys helping getting that corrected. Again, we are currently broadcasting live to YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. So depending on which channel is your favorite, you can always search for the Lions Grid and tune in. We will be doing pre-game episodes as well as post-game recaps like we have here. And you'll be able to catch us next week as the Detroit Lions go to take on the Minnesota Vikings. So make sure you tune in for that. Appreciate everybody's time, and we'll catch you during the next episode. This has been the Lions Grid. I'm Kevin Marhine. We'll see you later.